think we should get started. We're 10 minutes late, but some people are still arriving from lunch. First of all, I would like to thank UNWTO for inviting me to moderate this panel. To be more than an honor, it's also an opportunity for learning a little bit about a very interesting topic, geolocation. I think it's one fantastic work. Technology. All this conference is about technology. Technology changed completely everyone's life around the table. I think also in the tourism sector, we're feeling that technology is touching every point that the tourist interacts with our industry, from inspiration, and a lot of work has been done in inspiration and promoting new experiences. The planning system, we're all digital from the beginning, and I think we're progressing even more on that field. From booking, it's becoming more and more easy, it's becoming mobile, it's becoming fast. And I think that these two, this panel will embrace one serious topic, which is experiencing in the field. And also, how can destinations and how can tourism boards and destinations manage actually the tourism flows and the way that tourists can interact. We've been progressing in terms of history of tourism from, in terms of marketing, from a very generic approach where everyone promoted their destinations in the wider sense to a more and more customized experiences. I think all marketeers have one dream, which is one-to-one marketing. We're getting there. And this demands today one clear thing. We have to manage the tools that we have at our disposal, and we have more and more tools. We're going to have several cases these days. Changing also is coming to management, and I think the tools that we're going to, and the experiences that we're going to have today are tools that can change completely the way that we manage destinations, the way that we manage flows, the way that we explore our resources. Everyone is talking about in the industry about over-tourism. I don't like the word over-tourism because I think our job here is to get more tourists and to get more money in a way that it can fit the needs of destinations, it can fit the needs of people. So the word that I would like to use from now on is smart management. We need to use all the resources that we have in our hands to better manage our destinations and to better make our industry more and more concrete. So today we're gonna talk about understanding. The topic of this session is understanding context is key to success. We have in a lecture from the morning very interesting insights about how can we understand consumers, and a consumer can have a completely different behavior depending on context. And these tools can provide us context for that. Also for providing new experiences and especially to manage resources and forecasts. Today we have six. I'll explain later. We have six brilliant solutions. We have, I'll start from Susan. We have Susan Becken from Griffith University. She's been working about use of social media to study the tourism behavior. We have Sushi Anand, which is co-founder from Geo4Hall. We have Simon Hughes, which is managing director from Hatfield Consultants, and it also do a presentation on DigitalGlobe. We have Jaime de Mora, which is VP for Ventas from Carto. Ventas, right? We have Albrecht Schmidt from is a computer scientist from European Space Agency. And finally, we'll end with Simon Hughes from DigitalGlobe. Well, with no further delay, I would like to ask Suzanne please tell us a little bit about your experience in the work, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Why the local context matters. So I think we've heard it really this morning, and I can see a major shift globally in tourism from a marketing focus to a management focus. with that comes a change in how we measure performance and success. So in the past, and a colleague of mine from Queensland in Australia really put it nicely a few weeks ago in a meeting. He said, this is someone from the industry, he said, for decades we've tried to kickstart tourism and now we have to manage it. So rather than having top-line indicators like visitor arrivals, expenditure, we now need destination-level indicators to measure and monitor the impacts. And the impacts are different in every context and what they mean. So for example, if you measure water consumption, if you have lots of fresh water, it doesn't matter so much. If you are operating in a desert environment, it matters a lot. Same with visitor numbers. Just visitor numbers in itself is not enough anymore. A city may absorb more visitors than maybe a fragile environment. So it's really important to have this combination of micro-level destination indicators and what they mean. So I want to make 3 points just to start the session off, and this is really from my experience as a researcher working with destinations who try to capitalize on data to monitor tourism. Now the first point I like to make is about what are we actually monitoring and for whom? And I say that because sometimes people think we just throw lots of data together and the answer will magically appear. It's obviously not the case. So it really matters. There's a lot of stakeholders at a destination, not just tourism stakeholders, but there's transport planners, there's natural area managers, there's emergency services. They all need to know what the tourists do, where they go, how much they spend, how they spend their time. So I give you one example where we used Twitter data in Australia. And so Twitter is sort of a sexy new data source, but what can you actually do with it? So same data, completely different use cases. One was with the city of Gold Coast, major tourist destination in Australia. They wanted to know whether we can replace satisfaction surveys by monitoring the sentiment of Twitter. And so we did that and applied algorithms and so on. So it then turned out there were quite a few additional steps necessary. You need to filter out the residents. You need to have quite a high spatial and temporal resolution. And so we could come up with a solution that fitted the need of that stakeholder. In a parallel project, we were asked by the Great Barrier Reef to see if we can use social media, so Twitter in that case and some other sources, to monitor the environmental changes at the Great Barrier Reef. So if people talk more and more about the coral bleaching, the poor water quality, maybe some dead fish or so, could we use this as a monitoring system for the environment? Same database, completely different stakeholder, completely different questions. The second point I try to make here is building the capacity at the local level. So when I work, whether it's council or destination marketing organizations, there's very limited skill and expertise dealing with data. And I already said to Dirk earlier that, of course, here at this conference, we have people who are interested in data, who have a know-how, and who are probably leading that new technology change. The average destination does not know what is big data, how can I use it, can big data tell me everything? So I think it's very important for destinations to skill up and employ people in-house even who are able to deal with these data, bring together, and we will hear lots of interesting examples, but you need experts who can extract the information from those existing and new data sources. There's a very good example in Canada, a destination called Thompson or Kanango. They just won a tourism award, Tourism for Tomorrow, and they use mobile phone data and credit card data. And when I asked how do you get that, thinking they probably just buy some product, now they have employed 2 data analysts in the tourism organization to analyze that data. Now the third point I like to make is about the combination of traditional surveys that we often use in tourism and new forms of data like big data. Tourism Research Australia, which is the national agency for the tourism statistics, they are under a lot of pressure because the national statistics cost a lot of money. And people say, oh, just get rid of it. Just big data will solve it. Doesn't cost anything. It's not quite that easy because, of course, with traditional surveys, you know your population, you have a very sophisticated sampling methodology, you can weight data, you know if the data is representative or not. With big data, that's often a problem. So what we're trying to talk to them about is about hybrid systems where you have some baseline survey, something like way to calibrate, and then you fill in using different types of data. That could be on a daily basis or in real time, could be high spatial resolution, but you always have something to anchor back into. Otherwise, you don't know where you're navigating. So hopefully the combination, obviously there is a need for local data. There's a need for local experts in the tourist destinations who can interpret those data, and hopefully we come up with systems that combine in a cost-effective way traditional surveys. Okay, they cost maybe a little bit more, but they give you sound information and new real-time data. And the outcome should be, like we've talked about this morning, more sustainable tourism and governance. So with that, I'm looking forward also to the examples that we're going to hear now. And I pass back to the moderator. Thank you.
Well, thank you for I think Suzanne made a very interesting introduction on how can we mix, how can we skip from traditional research as a service that we usually do in our researches to the use of new sources of data. I think one of the topics for today's session is new sources of data and what are actually the use cases that we use for that, but also the barriers and the challenges that come with the use of new sources of data. I would give each one of the moderators, we have short of time, so I would ask you to skip on your 5 minutes for your presentation so we can have time for a slight discussion with the audience. And now I will start with Suchi Anand from Geo4All. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm very grateful to be here to share some of the ideas. And I'll be coming from a different perspective, and I'm going to come from the perspective of developing countries and poor countries and why capacity development is very important in this area. So if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, all of them, especially, we are talking about tourism, there are clear links to different goals, but I find that geodata and geotools are fundamental for all of these aims. And the reason why these are important is location and context give meaningful insights for not only decision makers, but planners, everyone, for making informed decisions. So to make that, you need to have geodata and tools. But if you look at what was happening, I want people to think 10 years back, how many of you have been using these tools, just 10 years back, think about 10 years back, most of these technologies were very expensive, and from a developing country perspective, we were not able to afford, many of these tools because, the cost of software was very high. And there were very few opportunities for students from developing countries even to learn these tools because we didn't have these tools. We couldn't get access to these tools, and there was a big digital divide. So I will give you the context of where we start from. So this example from our colleagues who are doing in South Africa and across Africa, and now this is changing. And thanks to free and open tools and open data, we are making these things available for at the ground level from students at school level to university level to planners to educators and everyone. And I want to go back and give you an example of open data, all right? So how volunteers are changing mapping. And this, if you think about 10 years back, most of the data, especially the geodata, was coming from big national mapping agencies. They had the money, they had the surveyors on the field to, get the data. And then this OpenStreetMap happened. OpenStreetMap is a community initiative. And, it's in just 10 years, it has become the world's largest geodatabase of free and open data. And this is changing. And what I want you to think about it, what is going to happen in the next 10 years? When you have all these digital natives coming, all the smartphones, people with smartphones, and especially people from developing countries also contributing. So there's a big fundamental change that is happening in data. And this was the statistics of OpenStreetMap. You can see the users growing, and when these, what I want you to think about it is when not only the data, the tools are also now free. For the example from the geospatial software, which used to be very expensive and proprietary even 10 years back. Now we have foundations like the Open Source Geospatial Foundation giving away all the geospatial software for free and open to make sure everybody can access this. So what I want you to think about is, now we have the data and the tools coming, And also the opportunities for people in the developing countries and other economically backward countries to be part of it. You know, it's going to be a big change in the next 10 years. And Geo for All is an initiative again, and it's aimed for capacity development. It's just, you know, actually the same age as my son. And, you know, we started with nothing, and we have now set up these research laboratories in universities around the world, mostly in USA, around Europe, and now we are aiming for Africa and Asia as well. So we want to get these laboratories established in universities to set up the idea for openness in education. So it's not just open data, but open education, open source, and open standards, and all these coming together that makes this happen. And we have an amazing team of colleagues around the world. You know, this is our leadership team from around the world who are making this happen. You know, so that these colleagues, you know, all volunteers, you know, who are working to make this happen. And why are we doing this? And for me, it's social responsibility. You know, because you know, if you have a social responsibility to make sure education is for everyone, not just for people who have rich and have money. It is for everyone. So that's why we are making these resources free and open for everyone. And this is our examples from colleagues from South America, from Uruguay, and, you know, around the world who are now benefiting from this. And our aim is to make sure digital, you know, so this is another example from Tanzania, colleagues working in, you know, so we see a very different demographic of students who are now able to learn this. So I get asked this question, who are we? And quite frankly, you know, we are just, you know, volunteers from different backgrounds, from government organizations, academia, industry, startups, NGOs, teachers, students. You know, it's just, you know, this was the meeting I held in Nottingham a few years back, and we just brought together people, and, you know, it's just expanding. And we are a global community. And if you look at the websites of our labs, you know, different languages, different research disciplines, you know, all these people coming together. And our aim is building bridges, you know. So we work with the United Nations, you know, we want to make sure colleagues around the world, you know, have these opportunities. And fundamentally, it's all about learning and sharing. You know, we want to make sure, you know, we not only learn things, but we share that, our knowledge with others as well. And because we are in Spain, I want to from Spain, you know, we have a lot of work happening in Spain. Our colleagues are doing amazing work with in Girona and other places in Spain as well. And our fundamental aim is empowering the next generation. So we are training the students of now PhD students level, not only from PhD students, but from to the school level. So what we hope, you know, we are thinking long term. You know, we want to make sure in 10 years' time, and more than 10 years' time, you know, we have a lot of things happening. And because we are working in, we are now in a tourism conference, I want to share one example. I'm working with NASA for this Europa Challenge, which is open to all students, and we have been running it for 5 years now. And I want to show you one example of what students made. You know, and this is again a free and open tool developed by NASA. And the idea is, you know, many people, you know, we are talking about tourism, but if you think about it, students from developing countries won't have an opportunity to come and visit the places here. So what we wanted to do is the students themselves develop, you know, these kind of tools so that they can, you know, remotely, you know, in India or you know, in Africa, wherever, they can also learn about cultural heritage and all these aspects as well. So that's what we are doing in STEM education using open principles. So what we want to do is we want to create opportunities for high quality education for all economic backgrounds. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry for the ring, but I think you have to feel also the pitching pressure that some of the startups were experiencing in the weekend. So it is good. Thank you very much for your very insightful presentation. I think one of the things that we should think is data should be available more and more in an open way. So I think it's one of the tools for development more effective that we should all fight for. And now give the floor to Simon Hughes from Outfield Consultants. 5 minutes. So if you hear the ring, you know what.
Sergio, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As introduced, my name is Simon Hughes, Managing Director for Hadfield Consultants Africa, based in the Gaborone in Botswana. I'm here representing Botswana Tourism, and we're also a partner for DigitalGlobe. I will make a short presentation on their behalf later. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some experiences in tourism planning, and then touch on some initiatives that we're going to be beginning very shortly. So this is just a little bit difficult to see the white writing on the yellow background there, but essentially what I'm trying to show here is the abstraction of the real world into this geospatial environment, and how this information is so important for us to be able to make better informed decisions, analyze that data, and use that for policy implementation and planning. So the importance of geodata for tourism is that it helps us to identify opportunities, leverage those opportunities, integrate with other information from other sources, and protect the environment and conserve nature and wildlife. And if we do all of these four things together, it enables us to deliver benefits for all of the stakeholders involved. So the example that I'm going to talk about is some work that we've done for Botswana tourism. We've done 2 tourism plans over the last 3 years. This is one for Shashi Dam. This is a water supply dam. Interestingly, we're not allowed to do any water sports on this, so it's because it's a water supply reservoir and it complicates the water treatment process. So we essentially, the idea of this is to, the tourism in Botswana is focused heavily in the north of the country, in very, very high income, low footprint, and very high yield tourism in the Okavango Delta and the Chobe region. What we're trying to do in the country is diversify the tourism product to appeal to the national and regional populations for South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and so on. And in order to do that, we're leveraging these sites around these dams. So this is the dam lease area for the Shashi Dam, and this is what I call a blank canvas. And when I say that, I really mean a blank canvas, because we had absolutely no data apart from where the boundary was, and we didn't even have a fence. So essentially, this is the area. This is essentially largely untouched land around in the dam lease area, which was then very close to communities. And we had to develop a tourism plan that worked with for the tourism products and also support the local communities. So this is the plan that we came up with within that, and we essentially had to map every single feature, the water line, elevation, the dam itself, and so on, in order to be able to plan these tourism activities. So these are some of the issues that we're having in a middle-income country. We've heard from Suchith about the challenges in developing countries and lower down the development scale. And we're in this middle-income scenario. We're still struggling to get data, and we're still constantly battling to be able to get data to make informations and make decisions. So this is where this is not, we're talking about operational locational information, but we're talking about getting simple data to do planning. So what do we need? And it was been touched on already this morning, and that's standards. And we heard about the need for international standards, and what we're talking about for standards for tourism geodata, and something that it's not an initiative we're starting, it's just something I felt that with this platform it was important to say. And obviously, many of you might not be aware of what the benefits of standards, but it helps us with consistency of data and interoperability, particularly with other disciplines and other types of information. So this is where data models come in. And this data model is a definition of the types of data, and what we're hoping to do at the moment is work with Botswana Tourism to develop a data model for the Botswana Land Bank. The Land Bank is essentially a mechanism where the Botswana Tourism Organization is able to distribute land for tourism use outside of protected areas. I said that already. So essentially what we're starting with when I return to Botswana is developing this tourism database. So we'll design a data model, and we're going to start with mapping out each of the tourism concessions and start to get a better feel for what's within those leases so that we can make better decisions when it comes to planning and distribution of that land. And then this is an example of work that's also starting. So this is actual location information being used for better decision making. So this is the area around, if anyone's ever been to Kasane, that's Kasane in the top right, so the middle right there. The north of that image is Namibia, and on the south side is Botswana, and that's the Chobe National Park. You can see in the inset map how small that area is compared to Chobe. About a third of that district is a national park, but a lot of the tourism activities take place along the shoreline that you can see there, running along the shore of the river. And what we're going to be doing is, there's a lot of self-drive tourism in there, to wildlife viewing, and there's an awful lot of official vehicles also from the national park and the game lodges. And this causes substantial congestion. And I think we've all seen the pictures from Masai Mara Park and other areas around South Africa in the Kruger and so on, of like these vehicles all stacked up, all viewing one animal. And it's a significant problem there, and it does start to degrade the product. Because in this case, there is preconceived ideas of game viewing locations and timing and the routes that are most successful. And there is some evidence to support that, but there's also a massive area of the national park that is available. Where, I mean, obviously you'll see this kind of thing down on the water's edge, but what we're hoping to do is use location-based monitoring of wildlife. So there'll be an app for data collection that's being developed for wildlife observations by guides, which over time will allow us to use that information to make actionable data for routing and licensing of tourism operators in that area. And using that, using patterns of wildlife sightings. And obviously this helps us more with better policy and decision making. So I just want to finish on this concept, is that really spatial information really is the heart of tourism planning and development, and it's something that we really supporting this idea. So the idea of combination of data, people and policy helping us with better planning of tourism. So that's all I have for now. You'll hear from me again in a short while on DigitalGlobe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Very interesting in using geodata for planning tools. I would like now to call Jaime de Mora from Carto.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, of course, for choosing this session over the other, and thanks for the organizing committees for inviting me over. I'm going to talk about new location data streams. And what does that mean, right? So that means that we live right now in a world in which traditional data sources are no longer valid for better or for good decision making. Just think about two traditional data sources. One is census data, the other one is traditional surveys. If we look at census data, first of all, it doesn't give us data on floating population. That is the one that is going to be interesting for touristic destinations. The second one is that it's totally outdated, right? Last census in Spain, for example, was 7 years ago. In other countries, it was 3 years ago. In other one was 5 years ago. So now, world in which we make decisions in real time, census data is just no longer more valid. And then if we take a look at traditional surveys, there have been so many different scientific papers that actually prove that most of them are highly biased and sometimes not statistically representative enough. But right now, the paradigm has totally changed into a world in which we're absolutely digitized. We live with a phone in our hands 24/7, and that is not only leaving digital breadcrumbs of everything that we do, right? Not only where we move, where we go to, what do we buy, but also, for example, smart bands, or every time you perform a transaction with your credit card. There are even also some other sources of information right now, like IoT devices. Cities are being able to actually monitor in real time when do visitors and their citizens actually interact, whether it's with a traffic light, whether it's with a sensorized bin. We can track everything. So what this leads to actually is for better decision making, to really know better who are our tourists, how do their demographics look like, and therefore, again, make better decisions. But even to go a step further and predict how they're going to behave, where they're going to go, or what they're going to buy. We actually started doing that. Well, I'm going to talk about 3 different examples of different location data streams. One of them is credit card transaction data. We partner with, in this case, with BBVA and MasterCard. Not in this project with MasterCard, but we also are partners with MasterCard. In this case, with BBVA 5 years ago, to actually map the flow of tourists in Spain. So we can see here how they're actually moving throughout the country. But if we take a deeper look, we're even able to actually tell, for example, how do the Norwegians behave inside our region. So we can see that, for example, they are actually looking for sun, for good weather, for beaches. Well, if we look at the Mexicans, they want more of a cultural experience. We even went a step further next year, also with BBVA, actually trying to help the city of Barcelona to find different synergies between their different touristic venues. One problem they have is that the touristic venues, they have data, internal data. How much did they sell? But who did they sell to? But they don't have any idea of what is going around them. So actually, by using credit card transaction data, they were able to find different synergies, again, between different touristic venues and really know and shed some light of what is going on around them. In this case, it's very clear. We can see, for example, how Casaballo was attracting people from different nationalities, but they didn't have a single idea that there are high number of Russian tourists that we can see at the right-hand side, the left-hand side, sorry, that are actually on their surroundings, and they're just not attracting them. Another source of information right now that is booming and is really critical is actually telco data, to actually monitor and to analyze foot traffic, and in this case, for example, tourism or floating population. We partner with Vodafone to actually provide cities with better insights of where are the tourists, where do they concentrate, which times of the days, is it more efficient to actually allocate more resources in a certain area. And there are different, and there's a really interesting use case, for example, in this case, in the city of Lisbon. So right now, they have an issue between their hotel capacity and Airbnbs. They don't know how to track where Airbnbs are and also where illegal apartments offered to tourists are. So what they did was actually create a model with their telco data. So basically, every time you're with your mobile phone, that's sending a signal to the cell tower so they know where you are in each moment in time. Of course, everything anonymized and aggregated. But in this case, we can see, for example, in certain areas, how it says capacidad hotelera 0. That means there are no hotels, no rooms. But we see 300 tourists actually slept that night on that specific place, which tells us again that there are a lot of different illegal apartments which are actually offering a place for different tourists. So there are many different use cases that these new different kinds of data can allow to, but one of them again is really identifying where the tourists are in not real time, but close to real time. The third one is actually mobility data, how to help our cities to actually outsmart, as Waze says, traffic with crowdsourced data. And in this case, we partner with Waze data, again, no infrastructure needed, and it's right now the most accurate real-time traffic application in the world. So basically what they do through the Citizen Connected program is interchange their data with the city's data, so cities can offer more up-to-date data to their citizens, also more transparent data, and at the same time, Waze users and tourists have a better experience in the cities. Of course, there are many different kinds of data streams, that's like satellite imagery, weather data, but the most important thing is to think that the traditional data sources should really be changed towards more of a real-time, up-to-date, new location data streams. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you, Jaime. Very interesting presentation on different sources of data that we can use. Well, interesting to be the case, and I would like to know a little bit more about Lisbon, because it gave me some interesting insights. Now I would call European Space Agency to share with us some views on this. Albert Schmidt, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me, and also thanks a lot for attending this session. So I'm representing the European Space Agency. What I would like to focus on is a long-term commitment in the context of the European Commission's Copernicus program, namely the Sentinel constellation that is part of my daily work. So the Sentinel constellation is a constellation of 7 satellites currently that are constantly monitoring the Earth, and that could serve as yet another data source for the many applications and challenges that you've mentioned. To start with a motivating example, I would just like to show you the most recent Sentinel-2 image of Oviedo, which I just pulled yesterday evening off our servers. This is in true color. We also have radar satellites. You can watch the same thing, look at the same thing in an imaging radar as well. You can compare them, see the different features. So let me give a short overview of this Copernicus program. So it's the European Earth Observation System. It was built and led on the initiative of the European Commission. The 3 original use cases were managing the environment, mitigating the effects of climate change, and ensuring civil security, but it's proven to be very useful even beyond these 3 original motivations. It is a global system, so the examples that you'll see later are applicable to most places on land of the Earth. a lot of them even over water. Here you can see some buzzwords, chlorophyll, sea level height, sea surface temperature, soil moisture, etc. Those of you who are familiar with it will know that these parameters are useful across a wide number of applications. The Sentinel constellation here is a short overview that from our perspective is the backbone of the data producing part of Copernicus. So these 7 satellites are currently producing more than about 15 terabytes of data per day. So it definitely falls into the range of big data. There are also contributing missions which are not run by ourselves, commercial missions. If you want to have very high optical resolution imagery, you can also turn to Copernicus and talk to them about their needs. One thing I think that is particularly interesting in this context and for you is the Copernicus Sentinel data policy. So basically it was decided to use as one of the main drivers for the whole program a free, full and open data policy to make a commitment over the long term. So if you decide to use Copernicus data right now, you can be assured that the systems that you're building will still be fed with data from Copernicus in the coming decades. That's a commitment the European Commission took. These data are distributed by the petabytes. You can easily do the arithmetic. If we have 15 terabytes per day and significant interest, we easily get into the petabyte range. Just last week at an event in Oviedo, the so-called DIAS platforms were opened, the Copernicus Data and Information Access System, which are a cloud platform where these data are provided for free for local processing. Now, you've seen at least parts of this slide before. I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that the Copernicus and Sentinels, also exist in the frame of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This was talked about earlier as well. I would like to add that Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, is relevant here as well. As you've seen from the list of parameters before, life below water, life on land, 14 and 15 are particularly well supported as well. So just to round up my presentation, I would like to show you some applications, all based on Sentinel satellites, and also invite you to enjoy some interesting pictures. So this is an emergency response application. Highway 1 in California was covered by a landslide. Using Sentinel-1 data, Sentinel radar data, it was possible to reconstruct the history of this landslide by presenting a timeline of the dislocations of the slopes above the highway that eventually came down and fell into the Pacific. Another famous example are earthquakes. Again, an interferometry radar application, an earthquake of 2016 in Italy, which even shook us in Rome. And you can use Sentinel-1 data to measure the displacements of the Earth's surface in the course of the earthquake. Ice shelves, the last ice shelf in Antarctica was quite a big thing. I mean, more than 160 kilometers long. You can use the Sentinel imagery, Sentinel-1 in particular, to create a nice movie to see how it breaks off. Here is a massive data application, 180,000 Sentinel-2 images to create a land cover typology of Africa. Marine life, using Sentinel-2 optical images, it is possible to monitor the development of coral reefs. Volcanic eruptions, here in a false color image, you can see the lava flowing down Mount Etna.
Earth surface heat differences in the development of the surface temperature of the Earth Sentinel-3, the huge, more than 100 degrees centigrade differences in the eye of a hurricane, air pollution. You see the great producers of carbon monoxide on Earth, and wildfires as an example of higher level services offered by Copernicus. So these are just some very quick examples I wanted to walk you through. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Albert. Very, very interesting presentation. Now for finishing, Simon Hughes again with DigitalGlobe case.
Thank you very much. Oh, there you go. Great. So I'm here representing the lady whose name is on the right-hand side of the slide there. So we would have had a slightly more diverse panel if Catherine had been able to make it, but unfortunately she wasn't able to. And as a channel partner of DigitalGlobe, I'm happy to present on her behalf. Fortunately, I'm assisted by a couple of movies. So this is a very quick view of the constellation that was in operation. The middle part of that is currently in activity. Worldview 1, 2, 3, and recently launched and currently still being calibrated Worldview 4 and the GOI satellite. Shortly to be followed in, I think it's 2020, is the beginning of the Worldview Legion, which is a much larger constellation of satellite imagery. And there's some of the movies will explain how these are deployed, but these multiple satellites have been staggered out to provide intraday coverage globally. And these are just some of the examples there. So you can see we're just talking about some of the different types of composites. That's the Eiffel Tower there on the left-hand side, and 5 meter, 3 meter, and resolution. And then the latest from Worldview 3 and Worldview 4 is 30 centimeter resolution. And all of us, I think, at school had a 30 centimeter ruler in our pencil case, so you know how long that is. So it's a very, very high resolution data set provided almost daily all over the globe. And on the right-hand side, you can see some of the different imaging options. That's the different views of the same place in Sumatra. So we were just hearing from Albrecht there about petabytes of data. In the 18-year archive that has been collected by DigitalGlobe, that's 100 petabytes of data that is in existence and available, with 3.5 million square kilometers imaged per day. And this is a slightly different paradigm than what Albrecht talked about, which is systematic collection of the Earth. This is imaged in kind of essentially shooting at different targets and then strips as the satellites have availability. So I'm just going to play a short movie now. Hopefully the sound is on. Nope. Oh, there we go.
It starts with a point, then another, then a multitude. Points of information, inquiry, focus, points that move us from insight to action. They define history and direct our destiny. Mapping has evolved. What once took decades to produce is now expected in days or even hours. And as the pace of life increases, maps must keep up to stay relevant and deliver more results as precisely as we find them on the ground. After all, mapping involves more of us than ever before. We're no longer just trying to get from point A to point B. We want to know what's around us, wherever we are, whatever the reason. At DigitalGlobe, we don't just meet the highest standards of modern mapping, we define them every day. That's the point. Because the better we see our world, the easier we'll realize its potential. Our commitment to you is simple. Innovative solutions imagery with 30-centimeter resolution for the visible spectrum and 7.5-meter resolution beyond what the human eye sees, both with unprecedented accuracy. We're the only company with 4 satellites capable of capturing imagery at better than 70 centimeters and delivering it to you within hours of collection. And we're home to the best and largest historical library of high-resolution Earth imagery and the best refresh rates. Assets like ours have a key role to play in creating the next wave of economic growth around the world. That's why we've built base maps covering 99% of the planet's population, and we're refreshing this data with unmatched frequency. But for all our pride in our image quality and capacity, we're proudest of what you're accomplishing with them. Whether you're improving the infrastructure of your city, or managing natural resources to ensure food security and stable economies, or helping keep us safe day in and day out. Or when disaster strikes, you're quickly understanding the impact, identifying damage, and building the best response. In the end, improved awareness means better decisions by all of us. So when it comes to understanding our changing planet, your opportunity has never been clearer. Learn more today at DigitalGlobe.com.
So as you can see, the tourism was missing from that in the applications. So before you point that out, I know. And this is something I'm actually working actively with DigitalGlobe at the moment. And this was the whole purpose of Catherine being here. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to make it, as I said. But the idea is to try to get tourism into that mix. And you can see so many overlapping applications within this already. And as I was talking earlier on, to promote my presentation earlier, planning is essentially was done with all of these tools that you saw here and can advance that. So these are, again, I've now got the hat trick. Here's the third time you're seeing the SDGs. But essentially, these are just some of the applications where you can see this technology being applied. I'm probably going to run over by about 30 seconds because I'm going to play this movie about geospatial big data.
Societies, markets, all interrelated and affecting each other. By understanding these correlations, we can solve global challenges and solve tough problems at a scale like never before. Geospatial big data is a living digital inventory of the surface of our planet derived from over 5 billion square kilometers of current and historical imagery and information. This inventory enables you to find, count, and measure features of the Earth's surface like never before. Let's look at an example use case. Suppose you're a retailer that wants to open up a new store. First, you'd look at the globe highlighting your successful stores and unsuccessful stores. Looking at these areas, you could dig into the customer base. What are the conditions of their neighborhoods? Are their yards well kept? How many cars are in the driveway? What's the square footage of their house? You might then look at the towns as a whole. How many houses are there? Have the towns been experiencing growth? How many cars are there total? Have the economic centers been moving or developing? You can see how as the picture grows, from a neighborhood to a town to a state or even a country, you start to get more information. Intuitively, you could guess that the locations with the nice lawns or nice cars are experiencing growth and will be more attractive. But let's let the data speak for itself. Geospatial big data has already enabled a number of industries and government applications to find trends and correlations that help them answer the tough questions they're facing. We're really excited about the newest developments here. Drop us.
So I'm just going to cut him off there. So in the interest of time, so I just want to really make a really quick point. This line that I've got on this diagram here shows the difference that the old chain of doing things, which would basically be identifying a need, downloading it, quality assuring the data, processing. I forgot what I meant CL there. Visualizing it, integrating it, and then deploying it. And essentially, what we're doing now is we're moving that line down. So a lot of this processing and analysis can be done in cloud platforms. That 100 petabytes of data I was talking about, and the same thing with the Copernicus constellation, that data is not sitting on a server somewhere, it's sitting on a cloud platform. I know that's still just a server, but essentially it's available to process in these cloud environments on Amazon Web Services. And it provides a huge opportunity to integrate with a lot of the applications and things like Albrecht showed us the opportunities that with things like air pollution, if we integrate things like air pollution into tourism applications, we can get a view of the future and where things are going in terms of environmental conditions and their influence. So really fast here, the opportunities in terms of unparalleled coverage, rapid access to cloud-based delivery of imagery, cloud processing, like I was just saying, to provide actionable insights for decision-making using big data and machine learning, and hopefully making some smarter decisions. So thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you all for your magnificent presentations. I'm amazed, truly, with all the solutions available, and to be honest, a little bit scared, because I work in the industry for more than 20 years, and we've basically design our strategies and monitor our activities based on 3 or 4 indicators. And more scared I could be if none of those 3 indicators was mentioned in any of your presentations. So there is a lot of things to learn from this. I think learning is one of the best things of being in cases like this. And to be honest, I'm in charge of knowledge management in my country. The name changed, and it's, I think, somewhat correlated with the things that you've been talking to. We are running a little bit short of time. I would now give the audience time for questions, for comments. Anyone from the audience would like to comment or do something on this? No? Okay, so I'll do it. And my question is basically, you've presented lots of solutions and techniques and very useful tools for planning, managing, measuring impacts, but truly destinations are not using it yet. Where do you see the barriers for the usage of this kind of tools? It's a matter of investment, is a matter of vision, is a matter of knowledge. What's your idea on this point? I would like to start with Suzanne.
I make a quick start, and it's been talked about this morning, and you had it on one slide to the people. It's not the technology, I think that's the problem in the moment, it's the capacity of the people to absorb it and to use it. And so I think what we need, and even as a university, we need to start training people much more. You know, we talked about business in the past. I mean, IT skills, data processing, that needs to be part of the university curriculum, because I think people are, well, they are scared. It's a black box. They don't know how to process this. The other one is access to data, and some of the solutions here are open source and others may cost money, and again, that's a barrier that people don't know. How do I even get hold of the data? How do I work with the telecommunication company, etc.?
I think just to add to that, I think that to an extent, I think it's awareness and I don't know, essentially I think the answer could be partnerships. I think what we've seen in Botswana, the government of Botswana, is we've seen investment by the Department of Service and Mapping into the cloud services that we were talking about there from DigitalGlobe, and that allowed them to access high-resolution imagery, help them update their maps, which then can be used for better planning. And moving forward, what we're trying to do is get more partners involved in that to access data together and to be able to leverage multiple data sets to help find essentially plug gaps for missing data and also potentially access data that's not available before. But I think to an extent it's a combination of things. But, maybe awareness, and I think a lot of these things look big and expensive and scary, and I mean, from my look on Jaime's website and Tato, I think the tools to integrate them are there. It's just asking the right questions, I think, is also important.
What's coming?
Yeah, I agree. You know, especially the people element is very important, and especially capacity development and education. You have to think long term. You know, you have to invest in training from different levels, from the school level to university level. All these things happening, and the experience I gave from developing world is, you know, we have to. There's a big digital divide happening still, and the way to make that lower is to have this open philosophy in all these ideas. So you have to have not just the open data, because if you have just the open data, and if you don't have the tools, then there's no point in. I was doing a train-the-trainer programs in Nairobi in an organization called the Regional Center for Mapping and Resources in Nairobi, which is like a African Union initiative for different countries to get their staff for training in mapping. And when I went there, one of the first question I was asked was, because we were talking about Copernicus and all the freely available data, and the question I was asked was, we have all this data, but where are the tools? And we don't have the money to buy the tools. And I completely understood what they are coming from, because I come from India, and we had the same problem. And I told them, look, folks, all these are, we are using free and open GIS tools, because again, GIS used to be very, most of these visualization have been developed with these geo tools, which are very expensive. So in the last decade, what I tried to convey was, there was a big change, with all these free and open tools. Now there is no excuse. Now all these people, if you develop the capacity, they have the tools, so they can learn and develop their solutions themselves in the local community. So we need to look at empowering the local communities for them to empower themselves. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe something that hasn't been mentioned so far is sort of more, let's say, from a data provider side, to lower the thresholds to using the data, even on the level of providing people with tools to play around with them, because even imaging data, you can derive a lot of information from them by just looking at them without knowing how to process them. And I think this is a trend. This has been recognized, and people have started to implement this. I mentioned the DS platforms. I could mention various image browsers by public and private entities. I think lowering the threshold is still something really important.
And actually, continuing on his point, I would say it's a twofold problem. So one is on the lack of skills from the people taking the decisions, and then on the lack of technology and lack of interfaces that enable those people to actually make those better decisions. So for example, we work with different cities. One of them is New York, and most of the, I would say, the decision makers are not technical people. So technology right now is really ramping up very fast, but we should be able to actually create better technologies that enable those decision makers to actually understand the data and therefore make better decisions. But until they don't have even a minimum level of basic statistics, it's going to be very hard for them to actually leverage the power of that technology. So I would say it's on both hands.
Thank you. I think you've mentioned two very important points, I think, and I would give the floor. I'll give the floor now. I'll send the message to UNWTO, because I think there are two lines of work that we can conclude from here. The one is we need to empower people to use these tools. Tools are available, but people need to know how to use them. The second one is to be aware of them and to provide a sort of mechanism of knowledge transfer between all the work that has been done on universities and on technological centers, on companies that are working really hard on this. And you need to make it available to a sector which is 98% of SMEs, with short number of people working around, with no data scientists, because it's one thing that I always say in this forum, because it's my case in the office. We don't have data science. We have people that love data but are not data science at all. So there is a lot of things. I think there is a bridge to make here, how to make it available and how to put people using it. I don't know, Dirk, if you want to comment on that.
We just wanted to react and tell also the others. It was for us at UNWTO very important to have this session here taking place. And you will remember that session because it's a historic moment. And that is how I conclude from UNWTO side.
Thank you. Well, any more questions from the audience? I think we're reaching our end. Time for a coffee break. Okay. We have one question there. Could you please say your name and where are you from?
My name is Anna Scutari. I'm from a research institute in Italy, Euroc Research. And it has been discussed about how new forms of data can substitute old forms, census data and sample surveys. I think the big difference is that sample surveys and census data, you design them for having the kind of answers you need to have. Whereas big data, you have them and you try to find something from them. You mine them and you get some kind of answers. So my question would be, why do we have to think in terms of substitutions between the two? And why don't we think about improving our traditional data with the new data we have? And on the other hand, try to understand better the phenomena through the richness of big data we can access now through technology. So why do we have to choose between the two?
Thank you, Anna. Before giving the floor to the audience, I think I see myself entirely in your question, with one exception. I've started using and working with partners on big data in the last years. And I think when looking at this was my lesson in the last 2 years. When we start looking at big data, we see a lot of data and we spend our time thinking, what the hell am I going to do with all this data? And we forget what we use as the basics for traditional surveys. We make the questions that we want to have answers before. But I would call you for any views on this topic?
I couldn't agree more with you. So thanks for asking that question. Just as a very quick example, so the National Tourism Survey in Australia costs, say, $4 million a year, just roughly. And so the idea could be to maybe say, okay, why don't you have it every second year? And in between, you use things like credit card spending to fill in, but you do need that purpose-built survey every now and then to know, for example, what proportion of Americans use credit card for hotels and meals, so you can extrapolate. But that would be a compromise, which then, of course, and the credit card gives you daily data, whereas the survey only comes out every 3 months. And so I think you're right on to it. A combination would be the best of both worlds.
I think I'm just going to echo that. Essentially, in the remote sensing world, there's a lot of assumption that we think we can do everything from the satellites, and it's absolutely not that. It has to be done with ground-based information to calibrate and verify what we're doing. So, and basically combining with what you're saying. And we've seen really, really useful examples of using high-resolution data, and like Jaime was saying earlier on, between these long gaps in census, of using spatial patterns of building density, and having a standardized classification for building density that helps you extrapolate in that 10-year period. That's just an example of ways. But again, you wouldn't be able to work out what that meant if you didn't have one pin at the beginning and the one at the end. So, but I appreciate the question, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that's a great question. And actually, I wouldn't say there's a single source of data that answers each and every question. So, for example, you've got mobile data or foot traffic data that can just tell you where people is moving and where are they at each moment in time. But you don't know, you don't have visibility of what they're doing. On the other hand, for example, credit card transaction data tells you what they're doing, what they're spending the money on, but not where they are when they're not spending money. Or, for example, where do they live? So I would say each data source has its own pros and cons, and it's true that the best is actually to make a good assessment of which data sources are critical for each use case, and then choose the best ones. And of course, surveys and census, depending on the use case, could be really valid, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that it was a very good question, and the way I see these, huge amounts of data is that they are able to provide you, who has usually a very concrete question in your mind, to provide you with additional data points that help you work on the question, that help you gain confidence in the answer that you provide, but also, let's say, to allow you to explore the space around the question, to find alternative answers, alternative formulations of the question that might be useful in different contexts as well.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? I don't see anyone. Well, so this is the end of the session. I would like, first of all, to thank the panelists for excellent presentations, learn a lot. Thank you very much. Also the participants, I hope it can have been an interesting session for you. And thank you to UNWTO for having us for this historical panel. And well, I wish you a fruitful conference for the rest of the days. Well, thank you very much. Bye.